Our fourth panel, China, best frenemies? China, if you haven't noticed, everything is made in China. This microphone is probably made in China. I know for a fact when I picked up this podium the other day, it's made in China. After being left behind after the world's rebuild post-World War II, China seemed to always take a back seat to everywhere we decided to fight a war. The first time I remember hearing about China when I was a kid, I heard about them forcing families to decide which children to keep and the ones to throw away. They were kind of a joke to me growing up. But then all of a sudden we needed communist China. China sat in the corner figuring out how to make everyone else become dependent on them. And now here we are. Easily one of the most daunting military threats. They have more money than God, and now intentionally standing tall in the face of the rest of the world, and sometimes dictating how we operate our everyday lives. Is this just the natural order of things? Can we afford to turn a blind eye to the freedom and the power of the Chinese to conduct business as usual? Should we continue to ignore what the Chinese government does in spite of what some are calling a new Cold War? Will you please welcome back to the stage our moderator, Brian Edwards. And our panelists, returning also, Jack Posobiec. Or the PC principal. The host of the Chad Prather Show and primary candidate for governor of Texas, Chad Prather. She's a journalist for The Spectator, Melissa Chen. And an American news editor at the Post Millennial, Mia Cathell.
All right, so China. I could have used a quote by Charles de Gaulle that says, China is a place that's filled with many Chinese people, which is the first quote from China that comes up when you get Googled. I have no idea what it means. But it's interesting because China was in 1945 probably our most important ally in World War II, soaking up most of the Japanese offensive army, making it a lot easier for this. Now, increasingly, it seems like China is a bit of a lunchroom bully that's taking our school money. And I guess I wanted to start out with, what do you feel in what ways is China playing like economic or political warfare that's like most concerning? I'll start with you, Jack.
Well, I guess to kind of set the stage, I'm, for the benefit of people who haven't, really looked at this for a while, but also are wondering, kind of what is the deal with China, right? It's a situation where the U.S. and China have been in this relationship since, well, originally from 1945 on, but specifically from the end of the Mao era forward, so starting with Deng Xiaoping in 1979, and then later really through the 90s, post-Tiananmen Square, the response was bring China into the system, bring China into this world global economic forum, and that will make China better, that will make China become more of a liberal democracy, will open them up, and that will break communism in their system. However, it's been quite the opposite, right? They haven't become more like us, we've become more like them. We've become more authoritarian, we've become more closed, we have much more central authority than we used to have. And I don't just mean the United States, I mean the West writ large. And you've also seen this massive economic shift. So the manufacturing base has mostly moved to East Asia, whereas the US, both as a country and as an economy, is turned into much more of a consumer-based, consumer and server-based, service-based society.
Okay, what do you think, Melissa? Do you find like kind of the atrophy of our industries to be the biggest thing, or is it something else geopolitical?
It's all of the above when it comes to China. You mentioned political and economic warfare. China has grown a lot by very illegitimate means. I mean, they have, stolen a lot of intellectual property, used a lot of forced technology transfers that are really actually violating the terms of the WTO, but we've never actually punished them for it. So a lot of their growth has been ill-gotten in a way. And not to mention, just ideologically, the way they infiltrate our, Hollywood and with information. Like, they're censoring what Americans can say, what entertainment we can watch. And, it's like this. We're supposed to be a country that is free of this kind of influence. Like, we have the freedom of speech, but China's able to use their market access as such a huge leverage to prevent, stories from being told, to prevent certain narratives. So Jack's absolutely right. I mean, this is probably going to be such a boring panel because everyone here, it's hard to find somebody that's like, go China right now. And it mirrors the sort of the national mood on this. I think by and large, like 80%, according to Gallup, 80% of Americans, bipartisan, actually believe that China is the biggest threat and have unfavorable opinions.
If you want to make it more interesting, I can play the pro-China side.
Go China.
All right, what is it? Stan it. Stan Xi Jinping.
Well, it's simple. The West is decadent. The West has fallen. It's a bunch of degenerates, people stampeding over each other at music festivals like a bunch of drunken fools. You've completely lost the plot. You are weak. Your democracy is weak. Your systems are weak. Free speech is stupid. By the way, this will be the part that Media Matters cuts, not, without the initial part of me saying that I'm playing their side. So free speech is stupid. Human rights are stupid. All of that stuff only exists on paper. So why should we ever go along with something like that? We should have a meritocracy where only the smartest, the most cutthroat, the most cunning are put at the top, right? We will push this through our systems, and if you have a people like the Uyghurs are in the way of our pipelines and our roads, then they should be removed. And
also, China is banning effeminate men on TV.
Get rid of them. Get rid of the effeminate men. And get rid of the propaganda in schools. Get rid of any movie that disagrees with any of those things. And if you're talking about that online, get rid of you too.
Jeremiah, like on Chinese social media, what's being talked about?
Well, as Melissa was saying, effeminate men have been banned on TV in the entertainment industry.
Really close.
Oh, okay. And that's based off the makeup-wearing, soft masculinity of those Korean pop singers we see. And from the Western view, maybe we want to masculinize our culture as well. But what it is suppressing artistic expression, suppressing any form of individualism, and that's more than just recreating China to be stronger, to be healthier. What it is cracking down on any forms of expression. It's similar to the ideological upheaval we saw that brought the country to a standstill before. So the kind of pop culture that it's suppressing, pop culture is what cultivates society, it's what shapes society. And President Xi has been trying to make it in the image of Mao.
So, Chad, what do you think? Like this cultural blending, is it cultural or is this straight up economic? Like, in some ways, like, who cares?
Yeah, the interesting thing is, to that point, they may hate the beta male soy boy cuck image in China as a culture themselves, but they love it in America because they want to weaken America. This idea of toxic masculinity here, which is, strong men and bravado, that sort of bravery that brought us through 2 world wars and into the 21st century in the way that we've come. And China may hate it in their own culture, but they love it here because they love the weakening of America. Trying to hold China's feet to the fire is almost like trying to hold Santa Claus's feet to the fire when it comes to Christmas. We know that Santa Claus isn't the meaning of Christmas, but let's face it, Santa Claus is an important part of our traditional ideas of Christmas. Well, China is, to alienate them economically and to push back on them and to defund them, if you will, is sort of like saying, well, we know that there is this evil dictatorial Santa Claus in China that's doing, his workshop of elves are actually Uyghur slaves, but they give us our stuff, right? And we love that. And so, we don't like it, but we're willing to not give it up because it eliminates so many things from our lives. And China's kind of sitting back in a lot of ways and I think laughing at us in the Western world because they live in an alternate reality. they don't see things the way we see it. You know, the Oriental mindset sees things sort of circular. Time is sort of circular versus us in the West, where our timeline is on, you know, we have a start and a finish. They see things in an alternate reality from the way we do. So the way that they wage warfare is not necessarily by dropping those hydrosonic bombs on us that are traveling in low orbits in the atmosphere, but rather what they want to do, and you know the term re-education camps, what they want to do is they want to control the minds of their enemies, and that way they control the behavior. And right now I think we're being controlled in a big way, because not only are they controlling our minds, they're controlling our spending habits and so on and so forth. And to that degree, until we get on board with this big evil Santa that's out there, and stop being quite a selfish culture that we are, nothing's going to change.
You stupid Americans.
You did the German and the Russian thing. I want you to do the Chinese accent.
Led by your stupid, senile, escaped nursing home patient of a president, think that you can come around and tell us like how we are going to run our country. Why should we do this? You've failed at every, look at what you did in Afghanistan. You failed there the same way you're going to fail in Taiwan when we come in and reunify our country under the might and glory of the CCP. We are the strongest force on earth. We have the strongest and largest army on earth. We should be the ones to rule this world, to set the rules the way they should be. You guys can't even handle a little virus. You tear yourselves in knots when it comes to taking care of this thing over rights. What are rights? Rights are nothing compared to progress. Progress and advancement, building a strong culture, these are the only marks of a strong government and strong leadership, and you have none.
In some ways, to be fair, how is that culturally different from a religion that preaches similar values, like of our way is the best way? I mean, often that's what you get. Like, this is a recipe for life, religion is.
Religion is a crutch. Religion is a crutch for you foolish, opioid-addled fentanyl freaks who sit in church pews and think, oh, if I go here for once a week, then maybe something good will happen after I die. It's ridiculous. Look at where it's led you as a country. Look at where it's led you all as a people. There's nothing compared to that. It doesn't make you any money. It doesn't strengthen your military. It doesn't strengthen your economy. It's a joke, and it always has been.
Okay, there's 5 religions, if I'm correct, that are allowed to be practiced in China. How does that happen? Are they allowed to practice?
Not really. China is very intolerant as long as it doesn't overpower the state. You know, there's actually a Chinese version of the Bible where they actually rewrote the actual Bible. And there, you know that there's this like story or parable about Jesus Christ pardoning the Good Samaritan or something and asking the crowd not to stone her. In the Chinese version, she gets stoned.
Really?
Yeah, she does in the Chinese rewrite of the Bible, right? Because she broke the law. And Jesus' compassion cannot override the state law. She was guilty of adultery. And so that's just a good example of how, yeah, religion is tolerated as long as it doesn't subvert the state. At the end of the day, China is a Marxist-Leninist state and upholds this idea that, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses and is completely intolerant to all kinds. I mean, you know, you see what's happening to the Uyghurs, and you know other religions. I believe even the Jews are you know, there's like the last group left or something, but yeah, it's not.
So if part of this is cultural, right? And you have somebody as brave as, say, Enes Kanter, who's the basketball player for the Celtics, that's willing to wear his shoes that say things like, you know, they have Winnie the Pooh, they say stop slavery. Like, is that the sort of cultural bravery that you're talking about? Or at what point have we bought into our own censorship? Or what China wants us to think and say out loud?
This NBA player is clearly a CIA operative who has been paid by the American agencies and is being told to say these things. He has no clue what he's talking about. He's being paid off by the American government because your elites have finally realized that we've been bilking you for all these years, stealing your wealth, and you think that because some of you are getting rich along the way, the NBA owners, by the way, we should have maybe even a talk about how the NBA players are owned by on these teams, but of course, he doesn't have any problem with that, does he? No, 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 no. You finally realize the scheme. We are the ones who have been making all of this money. We gave you a paltry allowance to some of your elites, but now you realize that all your money is tied up through us. 关于他们美国和中国这些两个国家也是两个系统的话，然后和他们这是一个挣扎的话，这个挣扎的话肯定要有一个国家，全系国家超级中国。I
wonder if this is being translated in the Twitch chat.
Should be.
这个的话肯定是中国的。There will be one world superpower, and it will be China.
His accent is spot on, by the way.
Oh, that seems like a lot of words for that. I'll believe the translation. But what is the solution? I mean, you have one guy sticking up for this, right? What should the NBA have done? If you would have been an exec, Chad, like in the NBA, what would you have suggested they do?
As far as the NBA?
Yeah, like when it happened, who was the guy, the GM from the Rockets, initially said like free Hong Kong?
You know, at the end of the day, and again, there's a lot of speculation out there as far as you know, how much China is going to allow freedom to exist. They're opposed to it, right? They don't want free speech. To Jack's point, or whatever alter ego he is at this moment.
You may refer to me as Chairman Poso.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, they do see free speech as detrimental to society and to culture. To speak out on that is in some terms a death sentence. To in any way, shape, or form express liberty or freedom or a capitalistic viewpoint or a free market or anything in that regard, and to certainly speak out against the government is something, as Xi Jinping would know, who of course grew up in exile, it lands you in exile. That's the nature of their reality. And so to the degree that we look at, say, what's going on in China and the way we've done things here in America, the things that we're used to, that we view as normal behavior, like speaking out on something that you believe in terms of a conviction, that's anathema. That is accursed in China. They don't do that under fear of life, fear of death, you know, and the life of your family and generations to come. You know, it means their life as well.
Though, if you're an executive and
Do you
somebody
mean
said,
to tell
this is
me
crazy to lose all this money.
Do you mean to tell me that the United States does not lock up protesters?
Say that again, Jack.
Do you mean to tell me that the United States does not lock up protesters? I saw what happened at your Capitol when you shot and you executed an unarmed American veteran woman. She went up there to protest, you shot and killed her, and then you locked up every single person that supported her, and they're in prison today, as they should be, because they undermined the government and they deserve to be punished for it.
But do we know where they are?
They're
Those people who were arrested,
in
do we know where they
solitary
are?
confinement where they belong.
But can you find them? Like we know we know their whereabouts.
Well, yes.
Okay, but in China, you wouldn't know their whereabouts. They would just disappear.
Well, of course, because we're better at it than you are.
But that's the case. That's the case. And again, what we're doing is we're trying to compare two very big world powers, two very big governments. Is one right versus one being wrong? They're both right in some ways, and they're both wrong in some ways. There are ways of viewing. You have to interpret people in the world in which they live. You have to interpret people in light of the history and the days in which they lived. So to look at China through an American or Western lens is a false viewpoint. That's a bad paradigm. You have to see through what they know. So again, Xi Jinping doesn't see himself as some radical leader who has named himself leader for life. He's operating according to the paradigm that he's always known. That's what he knows. That's what that's what they've allowed to happen in China. So that's why they're going to look at us, and what you view as normal, they're going to view as something that is completely off the beaten path. I mean, there's no excuse, there's no logic behind it. Because again, it's an alternate reality.
So explain to me, Ms. Chen, why is it that when Lee Kuan Yew operates the exact same policies that we operate under Beijing, you have no problem when he does it?
What do you mean the exact same policies?
The exact same policies that he understands that you must control a society and control the most basic instincts of this society if you want them to grow into an economic power on the world stage.
I think there's the philosophy upon which these ideas are guided, and in many cases, Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, had this idea about the state being very strong, and the state being a leviathan to kind of control human nature.
Yes.
So a lot of policies are very engineered top-down, but by and large, no rights. People don't disappear. If you live in Singapore, you don't really ever worry about the state disappearing. I mean, your quality of life is pretty good. There's no crime. It's very stable.
Why is there no crime?
Because there's a lot of laws, and we protect the laws. I mean, it's a law and order country, right? But it doesn't go overboard in the same way that China does, with retaliation, people disappearing, journalists being prosecuted. For
China never prosecutes journalists. China
does all
only
those things.
prosecutes anti-regime extremists.
Jack, it sounds like you're making a case that we're acting more like China. Slightly.
America and the West are trying to catch up because they've learned the system, which we adopted quite largely from Lee Kuan Yew, and we honor his legacy and his contributions to the world system in terms of this. You need a strong authority, a strong central authority to set your course for your nation, to make the decisions. China is a large country with a long history. We understand what is best for our nation, and it is only best when it is controlled by a strong central leader, strong central leadership. That is clearly the leadership of the party. Now, the United States has started finally to wake up from its long drunken stupor of believing in these things like rights and equality and endowed by your creator with all these various things believed by that idiot Thomas Jefferson, who's also supported the French Revolution. How did that go, by the way? Tearing apart an entire country limb from limb. So we finally decided to the United States has finally, thank God, decided to thank Mao, throw Jefferson on the ash heap of history where he belongs, throw Washington, and I applaud the efforts of many of the people who I've even heard here tonight say that they want to throw Washington and Jefferson and the Constitution on the ash heap of history. Thank you. You finally are starting to understand what it takes to play to win.
Okay, excellent impression of Xi and Klaus. That's impressive. I want to get Mia in here. What would you do? This is an interesting question because China is both not only kind of the world's manufacturer, as they like to claim. It's a huge manufacturing base, but it's also a massive market. So, I mean, what is the NBA supposed to do? If you're in that exec boardroom and they say, are you kidding me? We have to get these people to stop talking about Hong Kong, or else the Chinese media will take us off and we're going to lose a ton of money. That has to be equated. How do you, do they just say American values? How do you weigh that?
First of all, the NBA is one of the institutions in America that has certainly enjoyed the spoils of capitalism. Second of all, China is an economic bully. It doesn't answer to open threats. It answers to actions. We supported its ascension to the WTO about 20 years ago. And since then, our greatest mistake was not holding China accountable. We gave it this grace period, and what it has done is cemented its policies. And now we just look weak, we look vulnerable. We've been dependent on the productive capability of China, which is our chief adversary. And it's shipped American jobs overseas, it's compromised our American supply chain, and it's made us just so vulnerable. China's ascension to the WTO 2 decades ago, there were terms set forth meant to level the playing field in this international trade exchange, goods and services. We thought that it would permanently eliminate China's existing policies that were not compatible with this new liberal international order that's meant to empower and enrich governments, no matter the size, no matter the power. And China is unwilling to compromise. It's not. It's somehow remained in technical compliance, but it uses workarounds. It's a protectionist entity, and we still do not accept that. It somehow keeps on circumventing WTO trade rules by distorting markets, by ignoring intellectual property, by using forced labor in its manufacturing and agricultural sectors, and by coercing smaller foreign powers to accept its unfair trade policy. We need to nip it right now, or else it's just going to get worse.
It's actually long overdue, to enforce full and effective compliance to the WTO's set of rules that China's been violating for a while. I mean, in the realm of like international, relations, China really only responds to one thing: it's power, and we have not used power. When Australia complained and said like, "Hey, we need to call for an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID," what did China do? China retaliated by raising tariffs, raising duties on Australian wine, which is now in the WTO settlement dispute court. And I mean, rightly so. Like, that is mercantilist, actions in retaliation to, quite frankly, it's like the base level requirement. We should look into the origins of something that crashed the entire world economic system. But here we are, and China's still getting away with all of it.
Does the WTO have any real power, though? Or are they big enough to where they can just then say they don't care?
With enough effort, the world really has the power to isolate China. That includes the UN, which is so useless these days. But it seems like we're not willing to use, or just the international community is not willing to clamp down on this country.
What if you have and this is for anyone, the fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders to increase value, and you've got a huge market of over 1 billion people, and all you're going to need to do is change a movie character and make him less soy boy and make him more Marlboro Man. Like, why? How do you justify that you're not going to do that? Or engage in the Chinese market by playing by the rules? Like, how do you justify to your shareholders that we're not going to make that move?
Your shareholders are subservient to your government the same way that our shareholders are subservient to ours. There are many things in the United States that you have no free speech on whatsoever, right? You can't have certain opinions on certain issues, and every single person in this room knows what those are. Because if you hold those opinions, you will be torn from polite society, you will be destroyed, you will be fired from your job, you'll be left on the street penniless, homeless, and probably hairless. And so when it comes to China, it is the same thing, only we make those issues on things that actually matter.
All right. Well, how do you justify it? Like, this is a legit question. How do you tell American companies to stop playing in the China market?
Well, I've been saying for 25 years people need to brush up on their Mandarin, and it sounds like Chairman Jack has done that very well. Because let's face the facts, the world has gotten very, very small. We are a global community in a big way. What one does affects everybody. And certainly we see what we do here in America that affects the global community. China is seeing that as well. And at the end of the day, as long as we continue to play greedy, again, to use that analogy, and keep glorifying that evil Santa Claus that gives us Christmas every year, the reason that China wants Taiwan is because Taiwan is the #1 producer of those semiconductor chips. And they know that to control that controls everything. Every phone you've got in this room is going to come ultimately from a chip. It's made in Taiwan. Same with your computer and so on and so forth. China wants to control that. They know that they can put you on a leash in a very big way. Now, again, we can't sit here and say that one government is superior to another, look, the ideologies are one thing, but reality is another deal. Whenever Bill Clinton brought China into the WTO, and they've never obeyed the rules of the WTO, and again, the WTO has no power really to enforce that. It's sort of like climate policy and everything else. They're not, you know, the Paris Accord, they're not going to hold China's feet to the fire in regards to the climate or anything else. But it's interesting to me that Bill Clinton was talking China, China, China. George W. Bush was talking China, China, China. And then all of a sudden 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, everything was Afghanistan and Iraq. So over the last 20 years, we've been focused on Afghanistan and Iraq. And now we pull out of Afghanistan in the way that we did. And who moves in? An unregulated China. And instead of being Russia, who's going to stick an AK-47 under the Afghanis' nose for 20 years, or Americans that are going to put an M16 under Afghani noses for 20 years, they're going to come in with big wads of cash. And they want to buy rocks, they want to buy minerals, they want to buy the soil. And so the weird thing about it all is that's going to work. That's going to work. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if we didn't start seeing maybe another large-scale terrorist attack that happens, because now we're focused back on China again. What we're seeing here is not one of those things where we say, hey, does your method of government work? Well, it depends on what the prerogative and the priority and the end result is. Does the government of China work according to their prerogative and priority? Well, obviously it does. It gets their agenda across and it makes it happen. When it starts spilling out across the borders with the Belt and Road, you're going to build this massive infrastructure deal that's going to go all the way to Europe. You're going to start seeing a Chinese colonialism that's going to happen on a scale of anything bigger than anything we've ever known. And we're going to start seeing that spill over because, let's face it, cash talks. And to the degree that they can make some of these bad actors a lot richer, it's going to be harder and harder to hold their feet to the fire. And here we are, mentally obese. And we're gluttons to technology, and we're gluttons to convenience, and we're gluttons to our comfort. And we're going to continue to allow it to happen by apathy. So until we're willing to say no more and put a stop to it, it's not going to end. There will be no accountability to this. And in the end of the day, I do hope that you have brushed up on your Mandarin, because that's what's coming. And let's face it, when it comes to dictators, they've never been about anything except for world domination. And that's what's coming, because that's what the agenda is, unless we do something about it.
I think the toolkit that's available to us as a liberal democracy is very limited when it comes to addressing this, you know, what happens when private companies kowtow or capitulate to China. There's this quote I really like. It's either attributed to Lenin or Stalin. It's the capitalists will sell us the rope which we will use to hang them. And I think that's exactly what's happening. You know, I mean, at most we can use shame, right? Like, so we can shame Disney, for example, which is what South Park did, and point out the hypocrisy, especially when it comes to, say, supporting very woke agendas here in the United States, but enabling, you know, a government that actually openly is conducting cultural genocide, repression of the Uyghurs, and, you know, slave labor and things like that, modern day slave labor in 2021, which the WTO is still endorsing. And so, you know, I think shame is a very useful tool. Consumers here can make their voting power, their purchasing power felt. By telling companies, no, we're not going to support that, you know. So you gave the example of someone like Enes Kanter wearing these sneakers. Well, we should manufacture those sneakers, you know, show Nike that there are consumers who actually don't want to be a cup to China.
So in the same way that people will pay more for organic food?
Exactly. Right? If we can shame behaviors like that, we can do the same here. And then the other thing we can do is also, you know, especially when it comes, like, government can impose sanctions or have more industrial policy and things like that. We're very unwilling to take those actions, but we can do it.
Now China does, or sorry, Taiwan controls around 60 to 65% of all the chip manufacturers. So if we didn't have the political will, and let's say that Xi Jinping wanted to annex China, and we don't do, or annex, Taiwan, and we don't do anything about it, right? What does a future with a China-controlled Taiwan look like?
Well, Taiwan stands as a bulwark for democracy in the region. We cannot let Taiwan fall because that would mean the crippling of our democratic alliance in the East. It's one of our last footholds over there. And so as we examine the Taiwanese military, it's underfunded. It's certainly outnumbered by China, the largest military by active personnel, largest navy on top of that. And if we examine US forces, we're so focused on prioritizing wokeness over our combat readiness. Meanwhile, experts are projecting that China will be able to launch a full-scale military takeover by 2025. We should be shaking in our boots and trying to tighten our forces, but instead we're running recruitment ads about women raised by lesbian activism moms. Russia is running military ads showcasing strength and hypermasculinity, but we are trying to represent what it looks like to shatter stereotypes over here. But we don't care if you're black or white, Asian or gay. I mean, it's about being a true patriot, willing to die for your country and what you believe in, and it's not striking fear in our enemies' hearts that we are upholding diversity and inclusion. They're laughing at us. It's humiliating. Meanwhile, China keeps building up its forces. It's probably obtained a nuclear triad to launch missiles by land, air, and sea. It's continuing to build up its nuclear capabilities. And what are we doing over here? We're focusing on woke politics that has no place in war. War has no place for the political correctness.
Well, what if someone said, if someone challenged it and said, well, look, rare earth metals, China completely captured that market. So the world didn't end. That happened about 10 years ago. So if they get control of the lion's share of chip manufacturing, the world it'll blend in. Like nothing will happen. What would you say to that?
Well, Melissa was bringing this up before, but perhaps the World Trade Organization is obsolete in this era because it was created to address the Soviet military threat and the fallout of the Soviet Union. Back then, it was a new liberal international order, but the trade review it was a periodic routine of China's trade policies that happened in Geneva, I believe, last month. It was mostly performative. It's just political theater. The body that was hearing the complaints does not have the action to punish China. And so what are we really doing here? It's really just a chicken fight. Perhaps if we establish a new alliance, because America's alliances were built for a different century. We might need to have a new collective self-defense. And if we gather America's allies in Europe, we can counter the kind of statecraft that China is practicing, whether we impose tariffs on Chinese goods, release reserves of the exclusive rare minerals that China can threaten to withhold.
But look at the game China is playing. It's not just about, rare earth metals or chips. I mean, they're also investing heavily in AI. Combine that together, the hardware and AI situation. China's trying to jostle for this dominant position in building the fourth industrial revolution. And that is going to be the backbone of the next phase of the world economy. So we don't want China, building our 5G systems and having that backdoor, which, that's why the Trump administration tried to ban Huawei from our 5G network for building any component in it. But that's the risk. It's having China be such a major player around the world in setting the rules on which the entire world economy is going to be based on. And that's the danger with, allowing Chinese dominance in chips, allowing Chinese dominance in very key industries that matter for our national security.
How would you, in a nation that really wanted to get out of forever wars, and that seems to be a sentiment that's both on the right and the left, how do you get them to commit to the defense of Taiwan?
Once Taiwan has been liberated from the clutches of the Western imperialists who stole it at the end of 1949 with the dictatorial fascist Chiang Kai-shek, the generalissimo, I'll have you add, Taiwan will be brought back into the fold. We will then use our economic might to strip the United States away from its status as the petrodollar. Once the One Belt, One Road is established across Central Asia and the entire world island, then all global petroleum and oil resources will be able to be traded in a basket of currencies. This basket of currencies may include some level of crypto, depending on which day of the week it is, the renminbi, the Russian ruble, the rial, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to take this US-dominated system that has construed chaos and insanity across the world, and don't even get me started on all your meddling in South America and Latin America, toppling regimes, attempting to remove the glorious Venezuelan government from power or the glorious Cuban revolution from its existence. No. We are going to make sure to set the rules of the road so that there will be equality for all races, equality for all nations, equality for all genders, as opposed to the sexist and racist West.
Equality like Venezuela, where China, of course, has raped the resources, and we know who the billionaires are. They're the people who are in charge. And with a government globally or even nationally that has those dictators and oligarchs that are in charge, they're the ones who are going to be reaping the benefits. They're going to be reaping the benefits of any economy, any resources. We know that China's out of resources. They don't have natural resources anymore. That's why all of their arable land now is in Africa. They know that they have to rape the resources of other lands, other countries. That's why they're willing to come in and negotiate with the Taliban with cash in order to get that lithium, the $3 trillion worth of lithium out of the ground. They're willing to do things like that. Who's it benefit? It doesn't benefit the people of China. The people of China, by the way, and I've been there a couple of times myself, we alluded to the religion of China. There's an underground church there. It's been underground for a long time. We've smuggled Bibles into China. I know the risk. I know the rewards as well of those strong people that are in the nation of China. But those people have given up any hope of ever having any sort of equal share or freedom or any opportunity to grow or get above the lot of life or any of that caste that they were born into. They don't anticipate any of that. To the degree that that spreads globally, we're going to see that more and more that's going to happen around the world. Anything that form of government, that form of dictatorship touches, it creates death. It is, the often used and oversimplified Nazi Germany. You know, Hitler killed the best of his country. He killed some of the most talented, some of the most gifted. His greatest scientists defected. They came to America. Why? Because he was killing them all. The Jews were under attack. He was trying to wipe a race off of the planet. In fact, had he not engaged in the Holocaust, there's a good chance he would have won World War II. So to the degree that this same type of dictatorship that we're seeing in China spreads in a wild contagion by force, we're going to see not only destruction, but we're going to see an implosion that's going to happen that is going to have a global effect because there's a global economy that is invested in it. So we've got to pull away from this thing. You know, look, as an entrepreneur and as a businessman myself, I spend extra money every day to make sure that products are made in America. I make sure that the things that I sell are made in America. We've had our things that have snuck up on us, and we flip a cup upside down and it says made in China, and we're like, shit. How do you escape it? Because it is so entwined in everything that we do at this stage in the game, again, as a global community.
You can't.
China's
and you're not going to. My question for you is, what makes any of you possibly think you are going to win? There's nothing. You have nothing. Your answers are stupid. Your ideas are stupid.
China's weaker than I think we.
You have no way.
I think China's weaker than they project. They're structurally, their economy right now, also with the direction that the country has taken, especially in the last couple months, I think China's weakening themselves kind of right in front of our eyes.
China is weakening itself just by its own ambitions. It's always been expansionist. By stifling freedoms in Hong Kong, how will it maintain its economic role as an international financial hub? Because there are capitalist features of it that makes it attractive to other markets. Beijing's ideal scenario is to keep it as this financial center, perhaps to integrate it with this Great Bay Area project that would absorb cities in the Guangdong province, but that will not hold. On top of it, the one-child policy in China, that was to curb population growth, the growing birth rates, but what has that created? A nation of bachelors, an aging population.
And demographic cliff. Yeah.
Yes.
And yet, following our liberation of Hong Kong, your BlackRock, Larry Fink, put out through the BlackRock Institute a statement that you would be tripling Western investments in China. Tripling down on the pension funds from your states, from your 401ks that BlackRock manages. Where does that bring you back? To us.
But what does the Evergrande, what does that show? It's that there's a lot of systematic volatility.
The corruption
in the
of
Chinese market.
Evergrande has been dealt with.
So I want to line up for Q&A. We're going to do a little bit longer Q&A on this one, so anyone that wants to fire away, just go ahead up and find that mic. The one thing we want is it is echoey up on the stage. It's really hard to hear. So if you could just kind of like use your outside voice when you're talking into it, it'll be a lot better.
Stand in front of the stage. Yeah, don't use the microphone. Or use it, but stand up there.
Or yeah, why don't we start the line really close to the stage then? That's not a bad idea.
Hello? Yeah, this is a question for Sherman Jack. Did the Tiananmen Square massacre happen?
On January 4th, 1989, a rebellion against the glorious CCP was put down. The extremists naturally were taken care of, and our country was then funded by all of you Americans, by investing more and more of your money in us. And so we thank you.
Okay, there was a statement made about being adverse to forever wars. This is from Mr. Prather. Is there any record in history of an alternative to forever wars besides Carthage?
Well, the biggest thing, and to the chairman's statement before we started the Q&A, because the chairman's actually correct, and 100% correct. Because in their, again, alternate reality from the one we live in, there is no such thing as a complex problem that can be solved with political correctness. And we have elevated political correctness almost to deification. As long as we're continuing to make sure that everybody's not offended and they can't laugh at a joke, or we misgender somebody, or we have the wrong pronoun or something of that nature, we're going to continue to be walked on in that regard. Now, what I believe in is what they call a Carthaginian peace, so that when you conquer a people, you plow their fields under, you pour salt on it so nothing ever grows again. That's the only way you don't have ongoing wars. When you win, you fucking win. You don't rebuild their cities. You don't give them their armaments back. You win.
We agree completely.
But that's the difference between the attitude on the other side of the world versus what we're doing here. You're either in it to win it, or you're in it to prolong it. And we know that prolonging it makes us more money. And so to that degree, there's going to be ongoing wars.
Over the past 20 years, there has been a strong reluctance to hold China accountable. And the few results we've seen, at least from the Trump tariffs, for every one job created under the tariff program, American consumers paid over $900,000 more in consumer goods. So it seems that anytime we try to fight against China, that hurts ourselves. So my question for the panel at large is American prosperity a worthwhile sacrifice to curb Chinese growth and aggression?
Sorry, can you repeat that, the very last sentence?
Is American prosperity a worthwhile sacrifice in order to curb Chinese economic agenda?
Well, first of all, the U.S. is one of the largest military spenders, but united with its European allies, we can fight China. We can attack China with the West because we have more allies than it currently does over in the East. The U.S. has always maintain its standing as a global leader, as an economic chief. And that's the end game of China, is to take us out. So we have to play the same game that they are.
You see,
yes?
war. She's already talking about war. China has never waged war on another country in all 5,000 years of its history. And she is already talking about invading and attacking the same way the 8-nation army attacked China for no reason whatsoever in the early 1900s. This is the type of Western imperialism that we've had to fight against for the past 100 years of humiliation.
Except for the
Tibet,
current amassing
India.
of troops on the Indian border. Fixed bayonets.
India's incursion into Chinese territory must be responded to with force.
Vietnam, Korea.
What about that Russian island?
Vietnam isn't a real country.
French.
China still weaponizes other tactics of soft power. Political warfare, economic warfare, as we talked about, media warfare. It doesn't play by the traditional view of what we think of war, but it still wields that kind of power. It has, Chinese entities has bought out Taiwanese newspapers and broadcasters using the lure of advertising dollars to take out independent outlets. Even Chinese state-run media inserts have run in Western media, such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Tough on China, Wall Street Journal. So we've seen China flex its powers beyond its border more than just machine guns and missiles.
And to be clear, I don't, this idea that the world's going to end in one big nuclear bang, that's not what we're dealing with right now. You don't have to fight wars with bombs. You can launch as many hypersonic missiles into low altitude as you want, fly them around in a low orbit at Mach 5. That's not what this is about. At the end of the day, it's all about your pocketbook. At the end of the day, it's all about this commerce. It's all about doing without, sacrificing, paying a little bit more. We are actually giving up, we're giving up a global community to atrocities in the name of having things at cheaper and more convenient sake. It's insanity. But this is where we're living, and this is what we're doing, because let's face it, at the end of the day, we're greedy, selfish people.
All right, next question.
China's real estate market is roughly 30%, 32% of GDP, and seems poised for a collapse. There are several that are already collapsing, and Evergrande seems any day now. There are multiple generations of Chinese investors that have sunk their entire life savings into real estate. If the real estate market in China does collapse, does the panel anticipate a Chinese government bailout or potentially a people's uprising?
Western idiots like that CIA operative Gordon Chang have been predicting the collapse of the CCP for over 20 years. And yet look who is collapsing. It is you. It is you stupid vassals and your idea that you can have ownership. No, we will own you. We will continue to own you. And there is nothing that is going to stop. We have slowed down our economic growth because we have decided to slow down our economic growth.
If you run on a fuel of human beings, you may have 1 billion human beings to consume in order to be that fuel, to remain in the power that you have. But eventually, especially with population control, you will run out of human beings, which is why, again, like just as China has no arable land, they're going to other nations. They're also trying to do that to consume human beings globally, hence the reason they're moving into Afghanistan as we speak. So at some point in time, maybe not in this generation, but you do run out.
I think there's no way that Xi Jinping will let the real estate bubble shock the system. Like, everything is about hoarding and keeping power right now, and whatever it's going to take, whether it's a bailout, they will do what's necessary to keep Evergrande from becoming that domino, the Lehman Brothers of China. There's no way that he would let that happen.
And if speculative bankers have been playing around in our real estate market, then they will be dealt with the same way the Uyghurs have.
Right.
Mia, do you want to add anything?
Unfortunately, China is inevitable. How it survived all of this is amazing, but President Xi, he might be the most impulsive leader of this country that thinks in centuries. He's looking at a third term starting in 2022. Leaders since Mao have tried to conquer Taiwan, and President Xi might have the military might for forced reunification to be plausible. So I think while he is very ambitious, he has to tread carefully.
All right, go ahead, next question.
This question's for American Jack and the rest of the panel as well. For those of us who are, sorry, it was good, but for those of us who are, passively aware of the Chinese social credit score system, what do you think we aren't seeing right now as far as that trying to come to Western democracies?
Well, I mean, U.S. democracies already have that. If you look at the ESG system that's set up by large financial institutions in conjunction with the Fed.
Can you explain ESG?
Yeah, so ESG is, it's a corporate social credit score. It's basically a corporation's, wokeness quotient. And essentially, it's environmental, social, and social governance. And if you want to receive more funding, if you want to receive investment, if you want to receive direct capital injections, then you need to have a higher ESG score. So we already have them here in the United States. We have corporate social credit scores. And so there's this line about get woke, go broke. But they literally don't care. Like this is why you see all the, woke Inc., et cetera, and they're getting money because these multi-trillion dollar organizations are pumping this directly into these companies. So if you want any of that, then you've got to play into the woke game. And so this is why all of these really fake and stupid moves are being propped up, because the US economy by and large right now is fake and stupid. And that is American Jack talking.
One of the things that baffles me about the social credit system thing is that, in China it's top down. The government actually, has built like a nationwide. Everybody has to buy into it. The system, so which it determines whether or not your social credit determines whether or not you can get a doctor's appointment or buy an airplane ticket, and it's entirely top down. What amazes me is that in a liberal democracy like ours, we're building a version of social credit that is bottom up. Yelp, for example, Google listing, for example, whether a business is black owned or, having indicators like that. Yelp now has a reporting system, has this, if like you run if you're a white person running a Chinese restaurant and you're accused of cultural appropriation, that's a racist report against you. Expensify, the app, and a lot of tech apps are now having a social credit system-esque review system, and it ends up mirroring what China has, but from the bottom up. And it's just funny how it converges. It all feels like a totalitarian kind of techno surveillance state. It's just whether or not it's top down or bottom up.
Anyone else? Anything to add? Or we can do next question.
Because our system is best, and that is why you've begun to emulate it. It's simple.
Beyond protecting our allies in the region and we talked about protectionist economic policies, are there any effective punishments that we can levy on China that can curb their transgressions both inside China and outside China?
Sanctions.
Any sanctions, like what leverage?
Yeah, I mean, defund. I mean, you've got to leverage those sanctions. I mean, again, it's running off of this global economy that we are continuing to source and to fill that tank. You shut that down, and it makes a big difference in that regard.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll just say this because it's American Jack, whatever.
Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. You need the only body that's strong enough to actually do anything on this is the federal government. But you need a federal government that's run by people that are going to tell the Chamber of Commerce to shut up and tell both parties to shut up and say, we're doing this, and come hell or high water, we are going to throw these sanctions on, we're going to throw tariffs on, we're going to use economic leverage, because we're not going to go to war with China. That's ridiculous and it's not going to happen. But what we do need is economic warfare. And yeah, it's going to suck, which I don't know what the guy was who just mentioned that question, but it's going to suck for a while, right? Until we actually get some of this stuff right.
What's sucking though? Like,
do you realize
how bad? Like what are you talking about?
Like big screen TVs are going to go up, right?
Yeah, even more practical, Jack. That pretty much, I'm assuming that most of the women...
And the only way is federal government action. The only way is federal government action.
I mean, you realize that the majority of pigmentation in your lipstick comes from a pepper that is picked by a Uyghur slave. I mean, there's every little thing that we don't even think about that is happening. I mean...
And every American company that goes along with that should be fined, and the executives probably arrested. Like, these things can be done, by the way. It's just you have to kind of think outside the box a little bit in terms of what, like, a quote-unquote conservative would do.
But it's also our culture that needs to change because, I mean, we're so used, I mean, think of even like our political cycles. They're short-term, so we keep thinking in very short-term. No administration wants to preside over this big sacrifice, which is exactly what it is. It's asking a lot of Americans suffer, higher prices at Walmart. Who wants to tell women they can't use lipstick?
Yeah, lipstick.
Just
keep the masks on.
Yeah, and if Kylie Jenner is the one behind that, arrest her too.
All right,
go ahead.
Okay, so I have a kind of goes along with the last point, but I use a de-Googled phone made in America that I paid more for. I use a System 76 Linux laptop made in America that I paid more for. I don't use TikTok, but everyone thinks I'm a weirdo, I'm a crackpot, I'm a Nazi terrorist, all the things. How do you think there is going to be a cultural shift that says, if you don't have the latest iPhone, if you don't have TikTok, everything made in China, you're weird, you're wrong, you're bad, because you're not cool or something?
Go for it, Chad. You're as American as they get.
Well, I mean, look, it's a malignant tumor that's grown into a vital organ, right? You can't just flippantly state we're just going to cut the switch, just going to come in there and just cut things out. Because it has gotten so ingrained in our culture and our world and our expectations and everything that we do, that, to just roughshod say we're cutting it all off is virtually impossible at this stage in the game. But again, that's true in almost every aspect of our culture, our politics, our geo-relationships, you name it. It's what's there. But we got to start somewhere. At some point, you got to start somewhere.
It's also, and I mentioned it when I was kind of play acting earlier, but the capitalization that we've done, right? The FDI that we've decided to put into China through Wall Street and these firms is something that easily could be done anywhere else in the world, right? If we're working wanting to work with people who are actually allies of us, people who are actually going to be on our side rather than someone like the CCP, then we can do that. We can go to Wall Street and say, you're not going to do this anymore, and we're going to put restrictions on you if you continue to try to do this, like BlackRock, Larry Fink, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's actually quite simple, but again, it's going to require federal government action.
Couldn't they just use Deutsche Bank or someplace off to leverage those if we did that?
I mean, because that system, so much of it runs through New York to begin with, that you'd still create a lot of structural problems. And again, I'm not saying that they wouldn't be able to offset. I'm saying you build up partners, other partners.
All right, next question.
So as y'all talked about in the previous answers, if we get to the point where we're going to war, we've pretty much already lost, because that should always be the last resort. But with using sanctions, to, in part ban the procurement from China, could that be deemed as too regulatory and something that we shouldn't be doing in a free trade market?
What, to ban imports is what you're saying, or to curtail imports? Yes. What do you think, Mia?
I mean, while it's a non-state, open market-oriented policies that we practice, we also reserve the right to impose restrictions, because how else will China react? How else will China actually conform to the WTO trade rules? We would just maintain the status quo from here on forth. So if we didn't do it in 2001, we start doing it now, we'll finally see some change around here, or else China will continue to flaunt its power beyond its borders.
Tear up the most favored nation status agreement, kick them out of the WTO. And why would our Pentagon source from China? It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. You have to set up your forces, these massive market forces of, you mentioned procurement, right? Well, procurement through the DoD, procurement through the entire federal government should clearly be going to American industries only. And by the way, if you find out that those industries are also doing business with the CCP, then you cut them off as well. This is, the DoD is probably one of the largest purchasers of some of this stuff in the entire United States.
What would it take to kick them out of the WTO? I mean, how would that process happen?
Will.
But I mean, is there other nations that need to sign on to this? Like, what actually needs to happen?
Well, it's simple. You say either we leave, either they leave, or we do.
That's interesting. All right, go ahead.
What do you think will happen as we move toward cryptocurrencies and off of these government-issued shit coins? The U.S. dollar being the biggest shit coin of all. And secondly, will that rebalance our trade? Because, before we went off the gold standard, we had a lot of industry here. And secondly, how does Japan factor into all of this?
Well, I think of the U.S., this is something where, and I say to my crypto friends all the time that, I get it, like I totally get it, and I'm very pro-crypto in many ways, but at the same time, if the US dollar stops being the world reserve currency, you are going to see Weimar America accelerate faster than you've ever seen. That's where the collapsitarians are like, 10 steps ahead of the game, because there's so many people in this country, millions and millions of people that live hand to mouth, that live paycheck to paycheck, and their economic prospects are going to be slaughtered. If you think inflation is bad now, you have no idea what it would be like under that type of environment. Massive inflationary environment where a gallon of milk costs $500, right? What do you do then? And so I'm with the coiners when it comes to some of the structural issues, but at the same time, I think that simply thinking that getting rid of the US dollar being the world reserve currency is going to solve everything, it's actually going to create a lot of structural problems that, like you want a national divorce, that's how you get a national divorce, because you would see low-level conflicts erupt throughout the United States if that happens. Which, of course, would all be to China's advantage.
Thanks, Xi.
In early 2019, former Congressman Ron Paul mentioned that he said, America pretends to be capitalist and China pretends to be communist. Agree or disagree, or thoughts on that?
No, precisely. I mean, you go to China today and, you're not going to hear anyone extolling the virtues of Mao's Little Red Book or Marxist-Leninism. You're going to hear people who are just hyper-focused on making money, right? That's pretty much that's the sort of the dream of China right now, is make money, make money, make money. And it doesn't matter what stands in our way. And so that has been really the mark of not just Xi Jinping, but also the past 3 administrations prior to him. Where he's come up is to say that, he's really taking the shackles off and turning it into a society where they're also basically admitting that on the world stage.
But I do think it's changing a lot, especially in the recent months, that China is showing its, the capitalism of Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. Yeah, it's definitely showing it. The way they're preventing IPOs, they're cracking down on big tech. Yeah. So I do think that aspect of China being capitalistic is really drastically changing. And
well, it's capitalistic, so. But as long as every single aspect of the Chinese economy, every industry understands party first,
state-driven,
state first, and then everything else is underneath it.
We're also seeing a replication in civil society. We're seeing the repeat of Maoism in woke America. It's history repeating itself. That's why the left keeps wanting to revise history and rewrite history. It's just different players, but it's the same methodology, varying terms. Here it's race, there it was class. In Hong Kong, the national security law that was enacted, what it does is silence critics, criminalize any kind of dissent, expanding, broadening the definition of crimes such as colluding with foreign powers, and that's how they're punished up to life in prison. So here we have critical race theory. We're using systematic racism as a blanket term, and if you defy it, you question it, you're canceled in any sector.
To paraphrase that quote I gave just now, the woke are selling them the ideological rope that they will use to hang us. Because it weakens America from within without ever needing to fire a single shot.
Is there talk in China, like on their social media, are they using like wokeness arguments? Is that in the populace?
Well, the main thing you'll hear in China is they actually stopped kind of using this phrase because they realized it was too smart, but baizuo. So baizuo, it means white left, directly in Chinese. And it's funny because like I remember that quote from like 15 years ago, but now I think a lot of Americans have understood this, and it's kind of like it's just a joke. Like the white left is ridiculous, and they've seen that the white left has really taken over the West, and they think it's hilarious that they're putting these fake and stupid notions ahead of economic progress, social progress, military progress, and they realize that they're just leading, like lambs to the slaughter of the decline of the West. And you've got like Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, which is kind of like this authoritarian sort of response to China, right, as an attempt to sort of emulate but also compete with the Chinese system. But it's it's like too little, too late. It's not going to work, and it's stupid to begin with.
Okay, next question.
So, Governor Prather, when Texas declares independence, what would you then?
Well, it's like anything else. I mean, if you're a nation, you're going to have geopolitical allies. You're going to have geopolitical enemies. You're going to have the same with economics and so on and so forth. You have to deal with them, hopefully, in a form of diplomacy. We're getting to a point, though, quite honestly, where diplomacy is becoming null and void. Because let's face it, if Chairman Jack ever takes over, we're all screwed, right? We'll all be harvesting those peppers to create pigment for your lipstick. And that's the nature of what we're up against in this regard. So it doesn't change anything other than the fact that we need something. Look, we alluded to it earlier, but I think it bears repeating. We've got an administration in Washington, D.C. right now. We've got a president who should be in prison after this debacle in Afghanistan, the least of which he should be licking the windows in the basement of the old folks' home. The guy's so addle-brained and stupid, somebody's got to move his mouth in order to help him chew pudding. But to that degree, we need somebody with a backbone, somebody that's going to stand up and hold people's feet to the fire. I mean, at what point in time do we say enough is enough? So to the degree that we, right now we're incentivized to do business with China because, let's face it, we're dealing with cheaper chips and cheaper TVs and cheaper phones. You go to Oklahoma, like just to compare as an analogy right now, if you go to Oklahoma, if an illegal alien does business or transfers money through the bank in Oklahoma, they're charged 1% of that transaction, all right? We should actually charge more for doing business with China. So that disincentivizes your motivation for doing things that is built off the labor of slaves and human atrocities. So if you're going to do business and buy goods, rather than them being cheaper in America to do business with China, it should be more expensive. It should be more expensive. That disincentivizes it right there, but nobody's going to have that backbone because, as you alluded to, nobody wants to be that administration that governs over or through that period of time where we get deeper into your pocketbook. But at some point in time, that's the incentive we've got to embrace. So to that degree, if Texas were its own country, fuck them.
But this is actually where it's actually quite useful to, so like the shaming of China doesn't work because the CCP doesn't care. But, where it does become useful is in sort of selling why we need to decouple to the American people, to the people of the West, to say, look, we cannot go along anymore. Enough, to your point, enough is enough. And so we are going to use these economic levers. And, you know, when the libertarian corporatists come up and say, well, but Jack, a tariff is a tax. Yes, it is a tax. It's going to be a tax on doing business with China. And it's going to be a tax on China being able to bring their goods into the United States. We are going to use those tariffs, of course, built this country, by the way, and is a tax on anyone for the privilege of doing business with the US market. It's very simple, right? You look at it the way they look at it. If we want to have the privilege of doing business in China, and I was at the Shanghai American Chamber of Commerce. I spent a lot of time working in international business. I think it's very funny, by the way, when people are like, oh, Poso's just doing this for the money. No, dude, if I wanted to make money, like, I would go back to Shanghai. You know, I speak freaking Mandarin, dude. Like, I would go there and make him bank. But, you know, I'm not doing that because I actually, unfortunately, believe in this stuff, you know. So, you know, I'm here instead in Dallas and actually trying to fight for this, well, in Fort Worth, for, you know, fighting the, you know, actually standing up for the United States of America and the rights of free citizens. And so the idea is we need to look at our country as the special place that it is. This is our home. The West is our home. We are going to fight for it. We have unbroken civilization of our own that we actually need to take seriously. And it's pretty simple. The CCP plays to win, but right now America just plays. It's time to actually start taking things seriously again, taking our country serious again, and to actually stand up for ourselves and our civilization because we have a right to.
Fire away.
Why is the problem China and not necessarily the global bankers and the World Bank, IMF, you know, that is kind of, you know, putting this illusion, you know, of global dominance between China and the United States, you know, and, you know, it just seems like it benefits, you know, them for the one world government to, you know, have, you know, us to be at each other's throats. And I just don't think that China is, you know, I think they're more of a paper tiger than people think because, you know, if those people have freedom in their minds, I think they might lay down just as fast as the Afghani army or even the Iraqi army under Saddam. So, I mean, we don't know. You know, but I just think it's the global banking system more than it is China per se.
Well, I've tried to address that in my rhetoric today, and I hope that I've brought it up as well. That, you know, it certainly has been financial direct investment through a variety of these systems that led to the rise of China. It's actually quite clear that Deng Xiaoping asked for this in the 1970s following the collapse of Mao, the end of the Cultural Revolution. He said it was called reform and opening up is what they referred to it as. But what it really meant was we are going to allow the international financial system to come into China. However, they also, and when you, the one thing that I would not necessarily push back on what you said, but the idea that there's this one world system. We don't have one world system, right? We have this sort of like Western world, and then we have the Eastern world, and then there's sort of, you know, the countries that are kind of in the middle on their own, Africa, South America, et cetera. And there's these various competing systems around the world. I do think there are people who would want there to be a one world system, clearly, and that's something that they're, you know, very motivated by. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily conspiratorial. They just think things would work better if they were in charge, right? This is kind of what they think. And so China has, by and large, been rejecting a lot of that. And so what you're seeing now, like there's a great example, and people are asking this, like, why is George Soros suddenly flipped on a dime and he's like super anti-China, right? And this isn't because all of a sudden he believes in, you know, democracy and human rights. It's because he's financial interest to do so, because he realizes that China has beat him at his own game at this point vis-a-vis China, and so he's looking to protect his own financial interests by fighting against the CCP.
But not all. I mean, like Ray Dalio, Charlie Munger, and Bloomberg are still very much pro-China.
Well, Charlie Munger is the one who said that he wished, and he caught himself, he goes, you know, I wish we had China's system, well, I mean, maybe just their financial system here in the United States. He said that on CNBC.
Right, right. Well, I think the answer to your question is more that it's about the battle between China and the US is really still about ideas. Like, yes, there's, you know, a clash in terms of power and banking systems and all that, but China's rise is not benign, and we will not exist, our way of life will not exist as long as China becomes the superpower. And for that reason alone is something that we have to take very seriously.
Hi. Freedom of navigation has been probably one of the core missions of the United States Navy for as long as I can remember. And part of it, I guess, is because we need to protect trade routes around the world. That's kind of what we say the reason for it is. Now, if China's allowed to continue their expansion of their Navy, their island building campaigns, their expansion of their exclusive economic zone and territorial waters, what do you think will happen, and on what time frame, if that continues on unopposed?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the global shipping routes through the South China Sea, and I know a lot of people have pointed out that, Taiwan, of course, is the semiconductor home, but it's also, Taiwan is right along that main shipping route through the South China Sea up into the East Sea and then on the way to Japan. You're talking, and Korea. So you're talking about a massive, massive global shipping route. And of course it's in their interest to look at the South China Sea as, what do they call it, the Chinese lake, right? As the 9-dash line, et cetera, et cetera. And so, what does it look like? It looks like a system where, again, Zhongguo, right? What does China mean in Mandarin, right? Some people say Middle Kingdom. I argue that's a mistranslation. It's actually Central Kingdom. Their idea is they don't want necessarily to conquer the world through, and everyone, like they control every country directly. No. They want to set up a system of patronage, vassal states, where everyone is, when they come to the emperor, they have to kowtow. They want to go back to the way things were prior to the Opium War, where everyone has to eat from the hand of the Chinese emperor. And so it's basically going to look like something like that.
I appreciate the aggressive stance of all of this, but every single thing that we've talked about is somewhere that China has been building strength for anywhere between 20 and 50 years and attacking them directly on that front. Is there a reason that we are not trying to attack them where they're weak instead of attack them where they're strong?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the reason is like what we've just said, that we kind of suck when it comes to being, using large federal government action to do things that would be at the detriment of the short-term financial interest in terms of this embracing the suck when it comes to, hey, suddenly laptops are going to cost more and TVs are going to cost more and refrigerators are going to cost more and cars are going to cost more, and that's going to be a lot of economic pain for a lot of people. And so it's definitely better to actually have a slow process of this, so that when you're decoupling these, like, why do we have supply chain issues right now? We talk about the supply chains, but we never talk about where our supply chains originate. And so you have this bullwhip effect of, if there's problems in, there's a 12-hour delay in China, you get a 12-day delay at the Port of Los Angeles, and you get this huge, massive backup. So again, it's just this really stupid idea that we can put all our chips in one basket in terms of the globalization and say we're going to do everything in terms of business with China, right? That is, of course, their greatest strength, but also it is a weakness at the same time, because if we start seeking other partners, if we start looking at these alliances more, then it actually is something that could very, very quickly solve both of those issues at the same time.
And we're up against people who play the long game. We in Western civilization don't. We think that you're gonna pay extra for what, or boycott China for what, 5 years, 20 years, and that's going to get them in line. They play the long game. They don't have any, I mean, they'll do this for generations, thousands of years, because again, back to your point, they want to go back. They don't want to go forward. They want to go back. They want to be in charge, because at the end of the day, this is an ideological war that we're facing, and that's where it is everywhere. That's why I keep referring to this alternate reality that we're up against. We don't see the world the same way these folks see the world, and we never will at the end of the day, and that's why in the long run, pessimistically speaking, Western civilization loses.
Last question? All right.
No, we'll do one more. We'll get John
great.
into.
So, perfect. Since everyone seems to be unified in the arguments here relatively, I wanted to play devil's advocate and provide a scenario here to get your perspective on this. So, countries that trade with each other, and I'm not necessarily arguing in favor of this, I just want your all's opinion. Countries that trade with each other don't go to war with each other, generally speaking, because there's mutual benefit to maintaining that trade. For countries in which there's been an entire embargo on, for example, North Korea, we haven't seen any regime change in 70 years, even though there's been zero trade allowed. So what are the risks associated with actually creating economic boundaries between us and China when it comes to maintaining relationships in the future? Are we actually providing a greater risk of warfare or even other problems with economic sanctions or economic trade barriers? In addition, we've seen in history that dictatorships maintain their power when their people are poor. And the trade that we've established with China has grown their middle class. And the more that people experience wealth and the pleasures of capitalism, the more that they're willing to fight their own government. So is there actually an argument to be made that through trade and introducing a larger middle class through the wealth that we provide through trade, we're actually destabilizing China in the long term when it comes to their power over their people? And is weakening that trade actually risky when it comes to war and other problems?
Yeah, so this is the exact same argument that was made in the British government and Western governments in the 1980s when they were talking about whether or not they should agree to abide by the Hong Kong turnover of 1997, which eventually took place. This is the exact same argument that was made, that once we introduce Hong Kong's system to China, once we introduce more capitalism, we will grow the middle class. True, did happen. But then they also said that it was going to make this sort of political revolution as well as an economic revolution. And of course, Tiananmen Square came and went, that happened, that moment happened, but by and large today, the CCP is extremely popular within China. And so you don't really, I mean, there are dissident groups, to be sure, but by and large, there is not that critical mass of people who are dissenting to say enough is enough and we want to take over. It just hasn't happened.
I think we have to update that assumption, because if you look at countries like Singapore or countries like Saudi Arabia, where your average GDP per capita is so high, people really are living honestly better lives than the average American. The people are not asking for political liberalization. Like, they're not asking for more rights politically. They're actually very happy. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You got your 4 Louis Vuitton stores, you're kind of happy with that. Who needs self-actualization when the population is just kept at bay, like, with satisfaction? So I think we misunderstand, the need for freedom around the world. Like, it is not the rallying cry that we in America think that it is. Most people are actually very satisfied with just satisfying base levels of comfort, and actually are unwilling to risk that in exchange of freedom, as we see now during COVID. This trade-off between safetyism and freedom. And that is my concern, that we think that this is kind of a natural, inevitable progression, but it's not, and so far it's been proving not to be.
All right, John, go ahead.
My question is that when we say that China is a threat to the United States, I think that it's important to understand why Chinese culture in particular is actually a threat to American and Western culture, which broadly speaking is wholly degenerate. So I would say that given that Chinese culture is a nationalist, illiberal, anti-elitist, anti-feminist, anti-LGBT, patriarchal, pro-family meritocracy, and that strong countries like China and Russia are really the only impediment to the globalist agenda being imposed by Western countries actually being established, what is the argument for the American right specifically to perceive China to be an antagonist on the global stage?
So John missed the earlier part of our discussion, where I was basically spent the whole time making this argument.
Let's go.
Going from, because I was sort of playing the Chairman Poso role and basically saying all the same stuff you're saying. The response to all of it is simply that we are Western civilization, and Western civilization has immutable characteristics, has immutable traditions that we need to return to in order to actually, and stand up for and take seriously in order to actually respond to what China is pushing. Remember, China isn't just pushing, China's pushing that within China, sure, but within America, what are they pushing? They're pushing fentanyl, they're pushing consumerism, they're pushing atavism, they want us hooked into the Zuckerverse, they want us to be like the, take your pick, whether it's Wall-E or what was the Bruce Willis one? They want us, they want us hooked into the systems and to be like, serfs. They want you to be serfs. They want the Great Reset to happen. So if you want to stand up for human agency, if you want to stand up for humanity, if you want to stand up for religion, if you want to stand up for man's connection to God, you have to fight back against that stuff.
And at the end of the day, not a single person in this room wants to move to China. Period. Nobody wants to move to China. As good as everything John said, as good as that sounds, nobody wants to move to China, and there's a reason why.
All right, thank you very
All right.
much. Appreciate it. We have a 10-minute break. Come back at 8:50.